Hello and welcome to Aunty Lou's Hour. This podcast is for people living with HIV, their friends, family and colleagues. In this episode, I talked to Tamisha about her journey and having children after her HIV diagnosis. We want people living with HIV to know that they are not alone. Please show your support by sharing, commenting and hitting the like button. Together, we can end stigma and thrive with HIV.
Miss Misha, we finally get to meet. I'm so glad that you're here.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Lovely, lovely. Another Caribbean queen, I might add. So, I connected with you over Instagram because I saw you kind of put a post out there about Caribbean and HIV. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about your story, Misha, with your HIV story.
Of course. So my HIV story, where do I begin? To the beginning, of course. I was 19 years old. I came to America I actually flee to America from a domestic partner intimacy violence relationship that I was in St. Martin. And I came to the United States in 2002. And then in 2003, I just casually had no symptoms. There was no symptoms. I had no symptoms of anything. I wasn't sick. There was nothing wrong with me. And I just, casually asked my aunt, hey, I've been here for a year. I just want to go get checked. I guess that was my intuition or my sixth sense telling me, to go get checked. And my aunt said, yes, there is a free sexual health clinic you can go to, to get yourself tested, treated, or whatever you need. So she took me to that clinic. I went to the clinic, signed in, because they don't call you by your name, they call you by numbers. So I signed in, I got my number, I sat down, my number was called, I went in the back, they took blood. I went into another room and they asked me some questions. But then prior to that, let me rewind a little bit. On the paper, it asked if you wanted to take an HIV test. So back then, they actually used to ask you and you had to give consent for them to take an HIV test. Now, they automatically do it a part of your panel. But back then, you had to give consent. So I checked, yes, I don't mind. Like in my mind, I was like, I don't have anything to lose. I might as well just do it. So I did. I checked yes. And then went back, did all the works, went home. Like maybe I want to say 2 days later, I got a phone call at the house and I answered the phone and they were asking for Tanisha Isaac. And I was like speaking and they were like, this is the New York City Department of Health. You came in a few days ago and got tested. One of your tests came back abnormal. Do you have time to come back? So I said, oh yeah. That same day, I was like, oh, I could come today. Which was that same day. So then I went back downtown this time by myself and I signed in again, waited for my number to be called. My number was called. And then this gentleman brought me in the back in this little office. And there was a little table. He was sitting on one corner and I was sitting on another corner. And he opens this folder. He had a whole bunch of papers in front of him in a folder. He opens the folder. He pushes the folder in front of me and then he walks out the room. So I'm looking at all these papers. And out of all these papers, the only thing that stand out to me was this big plus round sign and red ink pen.
Was that? Oh, that's just really shocking.
So I'm looking at the papers, but that's the only thing that stand out to me. So then he comes back in the room and he sits down and his seat, and I'm looking at the paper and I'm looking at him and I'm like, what does this mean? And I'm pointing. 1 second, she's fussy. Hold on.
Sure. Yeah.
1 second.
Oh, lovely.
I'm so sorry, Louise. Hi, everybody. Meet my new addition, Miss Amaya. She's bossy. All right. So back to what I was saying. So I'm looking at the paper, looking at him, and then I I point at the paper and I say, what does this mean? He doesn't say anything. I'm pointing at the plus sign and I push back the paper in front of him. And I'm like, what does this mean? He doesn't answer. So then I said, does this mean that I'm positive for something? He just shakes his head, yes.
Oh my
like
God.
that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I go, okay. So then I'm reading. So I said, am I HIV positive? And he just goes, yes. And now he leaves the room.
Yeah.
Again, I am hysterical. I am crying.
Oh, it's
All
awful.
the things that's running through my mind, there were several things.
Mm.
One, I was 19. So in my mind, I said to myself, and I quote, my life is over before it even began. That was one of the
Yeah.
things that I said. Then the next thing that I said to myself is, oh my God, who's going to want me now? No one is going to want to be with me because of the stigma that was attached to HIV back then. And also the ignorance, my own stigma, the stigma of society, and also my lack of knowledge and health literacy on HIV at the time. So then I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to have the family that I wanted. I'm never going to get married. Nobody is ever going to want me. A lady comes in with him this time. And she's talking to me. She introduced herself. She was a nurse. I don't remember her name, but I do remember that she was the sweetest person to me in that clinic.
Thank God. Yeah.
She was rubbing my back and she was just telling me, you know, honey, HIV is no longer a death sentence. I am going to refer you to some amazing people who's going to help you. She was like, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. I heard her, but I didn't hear her. You know?
I know that feeling. Yeah.
So several things came back that time. So all my other panels was negative besides my HIV and my HPV. So I was HPV positive and HIV positive. With the HPV, I was referred to a hospital where I later had my first son, that they did a cryo. And a cryo is where they freeze your insides and the HPV cells falls off.
Okay.
So I did that procedure and I went home. Louise, to this day, I cannot tell you how I got home. I do not remember how I got home. I just remember when I did get to my aunt's house, I just broke. I had one of my aunts, she just had a baby and she was laying down on a couch. I just remember walking into the living room, dropping down to her knees and telling her that I'm going to die because I have HIV.
Oh.
And she just hugged me and we both started crying. And that entire day felt like a funeral because as each aunt came home, I had to tell her. Well, for me, I didn't have to, but that's how I felt. You know?
Yeah.
First of all, let's take into factor, I was a young Caribbean woman, just been to America just 1 year. Not only that, I was an immigrant. I was an immigrant. I had no status or papers to be here. And it's just, just so much things was going through my mind and those times. And I'm like, I'm over. Like, life is over for me.
So that's kind of that's wow. I kind of put myself back to where you must have been at 19 years old. But we've got your lovely son here. What was his name again? Sorry. Your son.
So this is a girl. This is Amaya, but I have two sons, Rashad and Nathaniel, who is 17 and 14.
That's right. So you were 19 when you found out you had HIV, and now you've got 3 children. That's fantastic. So how did that work for you?
So back to the story. After I went through my whole funeral day for my 19-year-old self, I went through the papers that was given to me and I started calling some of the numbers. I started calling some of the numbers, and out of all the numbers that was on a paper, only one organization called me back. At the time, that organization name was Haitian Women's Program. Today, they're called Diaspora Community Services. The case manager that was assigned to my case there, her Her name was Simone Ross, who is one of my bestest friends to this day. And I always say that Simone is one of my earthly heroes, because had she not planted the seeds that she planted in 19-year-old me, I don't think that I would be in the place that I'm in now, you know. And she made sure that I was taken care of. She made sure that I went to the proper facility. She understood my need. She understood where I was at the time. And she just made sure that whatever she did, she wanted to make sure that I lived. She wanted to make sure that I know that I mattered. She wanted to make sure that I know that my life in the end is ultimately going to be a result of what I do with it, right? Not what nobody else said. But of course, we didn't know the language and the terminology back then. It was all about your actions and show me. I'd rather you show me than you tell me, because if you show me, I will receive it differently than if you just tell me and don't show me, you know? And that's pretty much the dynamic of how me and Simone's relationship was as a client and as, you know, the caregiver. And then she referred me to my provider, who was my provider for a good 10 years of my diagnosis. And he was also very instrumental in me staying into care and being in care, because in the beginning, I was one of those people who would just cold turkey stop taking the medication because I didn't know how to advocate for myself, and I didn't know how to relate and tell the doctor, hey, this medication is not working for me. It's making me really sick, or it's amping my depression and anxiety or my suicidal ideations. I didn't know how to verbalize and tell my doctor that, so I would do several things like many people did. I would stop taking my medication. I will become resistant. Or I would stop going to the doctor for a little while. There was one point in my young, I guess now I was 20 years old or 21, when Simone actually had to come to my house with the ambulance and the cops and was like, girl, we got to stop. You got to stop disappearing like this. You got to stop not adhering, because you are going to get what you don't want, which is to die from HIV if you don't take care of yourself. And my doctor, had a real talk with me, and they made me write a promise letter to them that I would not try to kill myself or commit suicide or anyone else, and that I would adhere and continue to take my medication like I'm supposed to. And of course, that worked for a little bit. It worked for a little bit. I want to say like at 23 or 24, I met who would become my first son's father and also my husband. And of course, I told him that I was positive, and he was like, well, okay. He went to the doctor with me. He got knowledgeable about the situation. We had my first son, who's amazing, who's 17 now. And, though all the things that I thought that wouldn't happen was happening, I still was in a state of anxiety, depression, and searching for who I would ultimately become.
Oh, wow. Sorry,
I'll let you ask the question.
I know, I'm just kind of lost in that story. So the babies, you went through having HIV, you went on to have 3 children who are negative, and that's all quite straightforward for you. Questions I want to ask you actually. So one is about, like, what is your understanding of how Caribbean people? It's a really broad statement to say Caribbean people, because everyone in the Caribbean is quite different. But if you had to say in a really general way, the relationship with the Caribbean and HIV.
So I'm going to speak for my island, right? Because it's best to speak from experience or from knowledge base opposed to just generalizing everything. But I'm sure that it's not limited to one Caribbean island. Because throughout the diaspora, when I speak to other advocates who are of the Caribbean culture, we kind of share similar belief stories and similar things that have happened or is happening, right? So when it comes to HIV and the Caribbean or the Caribbean people, or I should say my island, the stigma is still prevalent, right? Even in 2023. But the stigma doesn't come from fear, right? It comes from lack of health literacy. It comes from lack of understanding, one, how HIV works, how HIV is transmitted, how HIV has different stages, opposed to categorizing it and generalizing it. Because I don't know for you, but for me and my island, when people talk about HIV, they automatically call it AIDS. They will be like, so like, I'll give you an example. Someone saw my mom, went up to her and was like, oh my God, I love what your daughter is doing. She's so amazing, even though she has AIDS. I do not have AIDS. I know. Never received an AIDS diagnosis. A doctor has never diagnosed me with having AIDS. So for me, the Caribbean and HIV is, we as Caribbean people, the ones of us who are living abroad, I and this is a big ask actually. We have to consult with our health department heads of our countries or islands, the prime minister, the governor, or the public health department there, and be sort of kind of like their consultant to not only teach them language, but also to teach them the health literacy of how within HIV, how it has evolved. Whereas now in 2023, a person who is recently diagnosed or is diagnosed with HIV can reach undetectable status, right? Not only that, a person who is, now let's go into the prevention side, a person who is probably in a serodiscordant relationship, who is negative, can get on PrEP, or a person who got raped or who got violated for whatever reason, and they may be at risk, there's PEP now. So we have evolved so much, and I feel like they are still stuck in the 90s or stuck in the late 80s, where they still think that HIV is AIDS, and the two of them are interchangeable when they're not.
I really hear what you're saying. What concerns me about maybe other Caribbean islands is that it's about the transmission. If there's no education there, the fear and the stigma comes in, and the transition rates will go. And some of these islands are quite small, so so I think there is some work to be done there. I haven't looked at the stats, but I have reached out to my country of heritage where my parents were born, and to see if we can, if there's something that I can do to kind of support, advocate, about HIV. So another question for me, my last question for me, Misha, is why do you think it's important for people to wear the red ribbon?
Ooh. As a person living with, or just in general?
Person living with.
So for me, a person living with, so I'm not gonna say it's why it's important for us to wear the red ribbon. I'm going to say, because not everybody is like open, because then see how that translates, if I wear a red ribbon now, they say that I am a part of, I am or whatever, and sometimes people want to be removed, they would rather be removed from a situation. So I will say, the reason why I would rock the red ribbon,
Yes,
why
yes,
I would rock the red
yes,
ribbon is because
yes.
it represents who I am, not only as a whole, but it also it's a talking piece, right? It's a conversational piece. Somebody sees you with a red ribbon, they'll be like, oh, why are you wearing that red ribbon? And that gives me an opportunity to educate them on certain things or to share certain things with them. Because not for nothing, even in big countries in 2023, stigma around HIV is still very prevalent.
Still there. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
still very prevalent, and the lack of knowledge and education is astounding because people still think, again, back to this whole AIDS is a medical terminology, right? But because of the fear-mongering propaganda that was pushed through the media information back then, that's all people know and that's all people remember. And some people who are in heteronormative relationship, they think that they're untouchable when it comes to HIV or sexually transmitted disease because they've been married for X amount of years or they've been with the same partner for X amount of years. And really and truly, none of those things are true or factual.
Yeah.
Right now, in this day and age, globally, women, especially women of color, are becoming HIV or acquiring HIV at alarming rates.
Yeah.
I do not have the exact number on me right now to quote it.
Yeah.
However, it's the truth. Women back then, all we heard was gay men, gay men. First it was gay white men, then it turned into just gay men in general. That include people of color, black men, and everybody else in between.
Yeah.
And who are they having sex with? Women.
Yeah.
Black women.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So for me, I'm going to answer your question. So for me,
Yeah.
wearing the red ribbon represents strength. It represents who I am. It represents a bigger cause than just rocking the ribbon. It represents a community of people. It says I support and I stand with my community because I am a part of this community. We are a part of this community. So that's what rocking the red ribbon means to me.
So if there was someone watching this that's just been diagnosed, a 19-year-old girl who's just been diagnosed with HIV, what would you say to her now, Mish?
Ooh, what do I say to all my clients that are just diagnosed? You know, I don't want to sound cliche and say, hey, HIV is no longer a death sentence. However, I will say this. If you take care of your HIV is going to take care of you. That means if you get on medication or you adhere to your medication, it will suppress the amount of virus in your body, making you undetectable, which is empowering in itself. Because if you have an undetectable diagnosis, you cannot transmit HIV to anybody. Anybody. That includes your spouse, your partner, your friends, your children. If you are undetectable, you can live a long, healthy, thriving life. And that means that you are the author of what your life looked like. Of course, this is a new chapter. It's a new road and it's an uncharted territory for you, but it's one where you will find love, you will find community, and you will find people who will champion with you. And this will expose the people that really needs to be in your life. And the rest, forget about it. Having an HIV diagnosis, yes, it's major, but the tip of the iceberg is going to be your mental. How do you handle your mental state is how everything else will play out. That will be my advice to a 19-year-old. That's why you exposing me, girl.
I think you're amazing. And Mish, thank you so much for coming on to Aunty Lou's Hour. And I absolutely bow to the divine in you, my darling.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here. And thank you for having me after all these weeks.
Love to you.